Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan. We're going to be doing something very different today, talking about the first book in the Witcher series, A Last Wish. And it's a collection of short stories. I'm really excited to talk about this. I successfully converted 2 people to the cult of the Witcher, so I'm very proud of myself here to discuss it with both of them. And let's just start introducing our guests real fast. Lady B, what is going on? How have you been? It's been a
Hi,
while.
I'm doing okay. Yeah, I know I haven't talked to you for a while. I've just been busy, like work. I got a job and I've been like working my butt off, but I'm here and I'm really excited to talk about this book. And I have just, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, especially because I'm not a video game player, so I've never played the video games before. I have actually I watched the series first and I didn't love it, but I didn't think it was terrible. But now I've read the book and I'm like, oh really? No, dude, I changed my mind.
That's what I wanted to hear. You got to know the gold that you were missing out on. I'm one of the few people who think the show was just objectively awful before I even got into the books. But as long as people say the
Hmm.
books are better, I could be happy with that. So I've
Oh,
converted somebody else.
definitely.
And we're also joined by the immutable Mustang Rider, who's werewolves forever. Hail, my friend. What is going on?
I don't like following Lady B. She took everything I was going to say. But then again,
What's your
the
history with it? Like, do you
same
have
as
the same
yours.
history as I did? Mine? Oh,
This-
where you saw the show? Do you play the video games at all?
No, I haven't played the games. I've seen the show, read the books, and as some people have heard me and Jed on other streams talking about it, I'm mad about a few things that Netflix did.
See, it's contagious.
Uh,
Well, it looks like we're joined by a few people in the chat. We've actually got some decent numbers here in the first few seconds. But Jaden
cool.
Hamilton, apparently he's just saying hello, but he wants to avoid spoilers because apparently he's going to be reading it after his current project, War and Peace. So yeah, definitely don't want to
Oh,
spoil it.
wow.
Come back and watch this later once you've read the book and see what you think. And Legatus Legionaris, he'll be here for a while, then jump out for a bit. So sweet. Legatus will be here for a little while. And JB just showed up. Hail, my friend. Great to have you here. So the format of this stream is going to be very laid back, more just a stream of consciousness, jumping around books. Sometimes we might go in order, sometimes we might not, but it's just really more a celebration of the first book, The Last Wish, and just like, hey, we like it. We really like this book more than anything else. It's not scripted. It's not in a certain pattern, format, or anything like that. We're just here to celebrate it. That's all we're here for. So I think we should just start off with initial thoughts. Well, actually, you guys talked about your guys' history with The Witcher, so I guess I'll do that as well. So my first history with The Witcher was the video game trilogy. I got that back in 2018. Played all 3 of them. Really, really loved it. And then I actually saw the first season of Netflix, and by that point, I hadn't read the books yet. And I just didn't like it. There was something wrong with it. And so I decided to go
Hmm.
see what it was supposed to be, what the true canon was supposed to be. Then I read the books, and that's when I really fell in love with The Witcher. I played the games several times, but I wasn't a massive fan. I was just like, yeah, no, I really like The Witcher. As soon as I started reading the books, it was off. It was immediate love. Read them all multiple times since then. Studied the lore, made lore videos about it, and just gotten a little a little obsessive about it. It's right up there with Doctor Who, pretty close, and you guys know how big of a deal that is for me. And Witcher season 2 is actually what made my channel. Doing a review of season 2 was my highest viewed video at the time and still my highest viewed video within a few days of me creating my channel initially. So as much as I talk
Nice.
more about Doctor Who, this is a channel built on The Witcher. So I just love this series and I'm really excited to talk about it. But let's do initial thoughts on The Last Wish, just kind of overall. Lady B, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this section?
Not really. Do you want me just to dive in on my thoughts for reading it?
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever you want.
So yeah, I was like, okay, I got the book and I started reading it, and I knew the background that it was like short stories and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, kind of like into that. But like, what I really liked about it is that it was very lighthearted and it wasn't like I've read a lot of fantasy and I don't think I have any fantasy like hanging around, but I mean this is like a short novel. Like you get a fantasy book and you're looking at something that's like this, you know. And so I like that it was shorter. And you know what was really cool about it too is like they managed to do like a lot of world building, but they didn't like bog you down with the kind of descriptions maybe that
Mm,
like you get in a bigger like meteor novel. It was just like, okay, it's a quasi like medieval world. here's the characters, here's the situation. They all start in medias res, which means in the middle of things, and you just kind of roll with it and you figure out what's going on.
No, absolutely. Those are a lot of the reasons why I fell in love with it as well. And while we're talking about yours, can you show off your virgin copy again?
Oh yeah, here we go, virgin copies. So I found this at the Goodwill in Ventura, and so I got The Last Wish. And it's got the video game art on it, and then I should do this in order. They told me, and then this is the one I'm reading right now, Sword of Destiny. This is a video game art, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, they're all video game
At the
art.
back, yeah. And then I found Blood of Elves. I don't know if this is this the third book?
Yeah, chronologically, yeah. It's the first novel, but it's the third one you
Oh,
read.
okay, cool, yeah. So like the first two are shorts, all the collections of stories, and then the novel. Now, the guy, I'm gonna butcher his name, Andre Sapkowski. Is that how you say his name?
I think so. I always said Sapkowski, but I'm not sure if that's right.
Sapkowski. I'm sorry.
It's close enough.
But yeah, but he published them as like short stories, right? Like in a magazine
Initially.
or something.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that when we get into A Voice of Reason, that short story, because that was his narrative device to connect all of them together. But
Yeah.
I want to show off my non-version copy. I've got the one with the Netflix stamp. So, but I got I found someone on Etsy who actually specifically makes just these stamps just to cover up the awful Netflix logo. So I've got all the books, all the Netflix covers covered up, and it came with this little sticker too. You can't see very well, but it's hashtag the books were better. Just like, all right, based. I really like this Etsy lady, but all right. Well, sounds like you enjoyed it. What about you, Mustang? This is your first foray into the realm of Witchers.
Well, because you made it sound like a novel going into it, I was really lost, as you and I've talked about. I did not realize they were a series of short stories. So I'm sitting there going, how is he going to piece everything together at the end of this book? It's bouncing everywhere. And then when you told me they were a collection of short stories, I was like, okay, I can understand how that goes, and I can see where it's going. And that actually gives me more insight into what Netflix does with my background with Hollywood and movies and theater. So I was able to look at it and say, okay, I know why they had to do this. Why did they do that? It really gave me a good insight to look at it and say, you screwed up. Literally, they screwed up the entire novella. When we get to that,
the novella
it's just
one.
upsetting.
It sucks that the novella story is actually the best thing about season 2, and it was still really, really poorly done. But the season 1 has often been criticized for its timeline, just shenanigans, and the collection of short stories very well could have gone in that direction. So I guess we'll jump in with a Voice of Reason, because A Voice of Reason is a short story that is just with The Last Wish. It did not come as an individual short story beforehand. It was his narrative device to connect all the short stories together. And that's an interesting way of going about it. And it helped ground the audience right away with what was happening. Whereas the Netflix stuff, you had to be 5-6 episodes in by the time you realized that there were different timelines. So Voice of Reason is just a much simpler, more straightforward way of going about it. And that's the beauty of the Witcher novels, is they're straightforward. They're not all that complicated. And sometimes you just really need that. I mean, there's lots of great character work, but they're not complicated. And Voice of Reason is a really way of going about it, in my opinion. So what did you guys think of Voice of Reason? I don't think you finished Voice of Reason because it's speckered throughout the book, Mustang. There's a chapter here in between each short story.
Yeah.
You thought about that?
Started off as a porno, and I hit you with that immediately. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, what am I watching? What am I doing here?
A wave of chamomile in here. I'm like, what?
That's how the Witcher short story started. But
yeah, that one got me off guard. I was really not expecting that. But from where I've seen, I can piece bits and pieces together, so I see where he's going with it, and I like that. It's like I've said.
I really. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It's like I said quite a few times. I like something that is straightforward, and seeing how he's taking it and tying things together along through the story. It makes sense. It's good writing.
Yeah, I liked it as a narrative device because, like, and I hope I am remembering all of this right, but all of the Voice of Reason chapters are like when he's in the temple with the priestesses and stuff, right? Correct. So it's kind of interesting because you realize, like, not maybe the first one he didn't get laid, The second one, it's like, oh, he got injured and he went there to get help. So it's kind of like you can fit the stories in the chronology from there. But it was interesting because of every short story, the voice of reason came in, and it really was the voice of reason because that's where he starts dealing with sort of the thematic issues that were dealt with in the other chapters. And I just think as a writer, that's really interesting because it's such an unusual structure for kind of an epic fantasy where there is such a huge world and it went on to become such a big thing. But I really enjoyed it, and I just thought that was very interesting because it kind of just cuts the fat from the meat. It's just, this is just straight up like, here's this story and we're gonna deal with it. But in talking about the theme stuff, it's like Gerald's going through some of his like personal stuff, and like you're getting character development too, and a little bit more of the world building too, just from their interaction. So
One thing I've
Yeah.
noticed going off of that, there is no filler. Everything ties together. And the tie together is that temple. That's what's bringing everything back. That is just incredible, and I love it.
Well, and that's another thing, not to constantly go back to Netflix's adaptation, but that temple is nearly absent from the entire series to this point. It's in like 5 minutes of season 2 in the second episode, and Nenica is like, just like there. It's like, oh, hey, you're passing through. Hey, guys, I'm Nenica. Bye.
like,
It's like,
hey, what's up?
no, but she's essential to The Last Wish. She's in the other books as well. She's a major character, and they've completely forgotten about her. But yeah, I haven't thought about it the way that you just described it, Lady B, is that the voice of reason is not only, constant references to voices of reason throughout it. They say it several times, but it's also the voice of reason to ground the audience. I thought that was a very interesting
Yeah.
way of putting it. And if you took voice of reason out of the rest of the short stories, I don't think it would stand well on its own. It wouldn't be that good on its own because it's just like,
No.
hey, do you want to get in a trance? No, I don't want to get in a trance. Oh, there's bad guys here. I don't want to fight. But when it's tied in, getting those narrative beats between the short stories together, connecting it all, it really works in a way that it wouldn't on its own. And it did something other interesting. The short stories were published in a different order than they end up in the story. Like in one
That's
short
interesting.
story, you'll get a reference to Dandelion before Geralt actually meets Dandelion. And
Is that how you say his name? I thought it was Dandelion.
it's actually that is up for debate. The audiobooks, they say it Dandelion as well. The video games say it Dandelion, so that's how I've always said it. So Dandelion or Dandelion are both acceptable, but Jaskier is not on this channel. Jaskier is an unacceptable pronunciation of his name on this channel.
Okay.
Jaskier, what?
As
That's what they call
gardeners,
him in the
it's
TV show.
Dandelion.
But yeah,
I'm
it's
just gonna
actually
call the dandelions in my garden dandelions. Or dandelion, I don't know.
Yeah, that's how the audiobooks does it. So I can accept Dandelion. It's actually not a perfect translation. From what I know, the translation of the word doesn't fully get dandelion. It's actually closer to white rose. It's kind of interesting why they chose dandelion. It's not white rose. It's something like that. That's just a different flower, but they chose dandelion because it sounds better. And because this was translated from Polish, and depending
Yeah, I
on
was
which
gonna look and see what it was.
It
That's
should be Edelweiss, I would think.
I don't know off the top of my head the translation, but it's actually interesting. It depends on which translation you get, the quality thereof. Like the translations that Lady B and I have are both David French, I believe, and he's the superior version.
Yeah,
And then there's another
look and see.
version that's available on
Oh,
Kindle.
this is Danusia stock.
Danusia stock. Okay, so yeah, this isn't the best version. There's 3 different ones, and they're all varying in quality, especially when it comes to the actual prose. Like I've had people read the third person, who I can't remember off the top of my head's version, on Kindle and said, "This is garbage. Why are you making me read this? This guy has no vocabulary whatsoever." And it's like, who did you get to translate it? It's just kind of weird like that. People can have very different experiences just because of the talent of the translator involved. And
Yeah,
that's something that I've never been on the receiving end of. Like most of the stuff I read originally was in English or was so long ago that we can't tell. Like with
this one's a David French one.
Okay. So it varies throughout the series. But
yeah, I was like having to say how reading it, I know you had told me that beforehand and I meant to ask you, but I mean these were 99 cents. How can I turn them up? But I was just like, well, I wasn't really disappointed with the translation. It didn't seem bad. It's hard to say because I obviously don't speak Polish, but I've looked at stuff, like I speak Spanish like decently, and I've looked at stuff And I'm like, yeah, that's like Game of Thrones. Like, that's definitely not how you would think. But it
Yeah,
varies.
I'll have to do more research because I have zero Polish stuff. I've actually been made fun of for my Witcher lore videos. There's a tower that translates to Tower of the She Falcon, or a character's name is also that Folka. It means she falcon, but in Polish, it is something like G apostrophe V. I was like, I had no idea how to say it, so I just butchered the hell out of it in my video, and people are in there like, "Oh, you obviously aren't
No.
Polish." I'm like, you're right. I'm not Polish. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But for Voice of Reason, that's pretty much the majority of what we can talk about with it. Mainly a narrative device, not a whole lot of meat to the plot. So let's go to the original short story that started it all, the original The Witcher with the Striga and King Foltest. And I know Mustang has a few things to say about King Foltest.
I loved him. Why didn't they do him right in the book? That was just injustice. Or in the show, it was injustice. The story, he was so fleshed out, so I'm struggling for the word for it. There was so much depth to him that we did not see from the show. And I loved every bit of it. His conversation he had, basically, I might have to kill you, but I'm not going to kill you. And it just, I was sitting there listening to it all going, he sounds like a king. He sounds like a king that is concerned because he did bad things with somebody in his family, trying not to spoil things. And this is how this happened. And he's owning something I've seen in every chapter so far. The person owned what they did. They are not going, okay, it's somebody else's fault. They owned it.
Right.
And I love that responsibility for actions. That is something in storytelling that we have to have, because if you don't have the responsibility to take on whatever you did, be it killing somebody, having relations with somebody you're not supposed to, if you don't accept the responsibility and learn from it and move forward, you're just, like history, doomed to repeat it. And the king's character was every bit of what I want from something like that. He had a great arc. The overlying thing that I did not, his daughter, I still don't know why she bit him at the end after she had changed. That one, I'm like I said,
So that's because she's only ever known the monster. She was a Striga since birth, basically. So all
okay,
she
that
knows
fills in a
is the
blank.
violent tendencies. She was never a normal little girl, so she's
I thought
always
that was
fighting.
so interesting. Like
Oh
the whole
wow.
situation of that, it's like on one hand you king, like, please save my daughter, and I'm absolutely certain she can be saved. I don't even care. Like maybe that was his way of redeeming himself. And then at the other hand, you have the advisor that is like,
Mhm.
okay, we need there to be a monster because as long as there's a monster to fight, like you're going to keep this guy in power, and it kind of maintains the status quo. And then he offers him to bribe him, and he's like, no, and he gets eaten and stuff. But I was just like, that is really interesting, and I liked is as a short story as it was very like succinct, and it just did a lot in a short time. I was very surprised at the sort of emotional depth that I got out of that. And maybe that's because the I was looking up the stuff about the author, and he's like an economist, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, like I was just like, oh, that's an interesting thing. Like I definitely marked some parts where I thought that was like interesting. He's had some interesting commentary, and
Mm-hmm. Well, you sent
we'll wait
me
till we get there.
the troll one, the one
Yeah,
that you
the
sent
thing
me.
about the roads.
Mm-hmm.
I like
Well,
trolls.
yeah. The thing that I really like about the Witcher series, and it's best done here, is there's a lot of ambiguity and some nuance to these characters. Like you're talking about with Voltes, he's very nuanced. Like the show just made him blanketly evil and dumb and just kind of
Yeah, he wasn't.
negative, negative, negative. And Voltes is a massive character. Besides, the main three, Dandelion, Yennefer, and Geralt, he's probably the biggest character from this one that continues on. And you'd lose all the nuance in the Witcher show. But when it comes to ambiguity, it never actually makes a statement of who cast the Striga curse. The advisor thinks it might have been him, it might have been the mother of Foltest, and it doesn't need to be answered necessarily because the crime wasn't the casting of the curse. It was the incest which brought it about. And like you said, Foltest owned it. And so it
Yeah,
didn't need to
everyone
be
kind of
answered.
owned their part in this. Even the like advisor guy by saying it's like, hey, we need you to like not kill this so it can kind of just keep the status quo.
Yeah.
Okay, I
Well, and
got that the advisor was plotting to overthrow the king using the monster as the device to get the king overthrown, scare the people into revolt.
eventually, yeah, it was
Okay.
a long
That,
term plan that Geralt was going to
Mhm.
derail. And
yep.
yeah, eventually gain power. But the advisor also cared about the Striga a little bit as well because he was in love with the sister who birthed the Striga, and so he has inherited care for this child. So there's just a lot of complexity, and
I
if
know.
you
And the
just
show
described it,
totally missed that.
hmm
Like, I liked initially I liked the kind of like not so serious like tone of the show, but now looking at the books and seeing it's like, well, they did that and they had all this other stuff. It's like, okay, screw the show.
This book could have been
Ugh,
at minimum 2 seasons of a show.
hmm
yeah, totally.
It could as well. And the big thing with the show that I think made it a lot harder to show all this nuance and character development is they included Triss here. And you guys haven't met Triss yet in the books, but she's another sorcerer like Yennefer who spends a lot of time with Geralt. But in the show, they inserted her into this Foltest storyline as the advisor to Foltest, which she eventually does become in the books, eventually, actually closer to the video games. But and had her do a lot of the investigation. She just gave Geralt on a silver platter, hey, this is the princess, this is what happened, this is who the bad guy is, and Geralt didn't have to do any of the investigation and the thinking through that we saw, so we'd lose a lot of Geralt's character development by shoehorning in Triss where she didn't belong. As much as I love Triss, in Witcher 3 you get to choose whether you romance Triss or Yennefer. I'm choosing Triss every time because I love her. But yeah, there's just so many mistakes made. And if you describe the short story to people, I think a lot of people would be surprised hearing that description versus actually going into it because it just sounds like, oh, Monster Hunter shows up, gets given a contract for Monster, beats Monster, and goes away.
That's
At
what
the
you get on the show.
surface, yeah, at the surface level, that's what it looks like. But from what we've discussed, there's another layer upon another layer for every
Mhm.
character. And yes, that is the basic plot, but the characters are what make it so
I
fascinating.
know they're so interesting, and I'm reading so I'm gonna just talk about this because it was in season 1, but I'm reading the Bounds of Reason, which is about the dragon, and that was in the first season, and it's like, dude, there's so much more to this story than what was on the fucking show.
Oh, you missed me. Jed and I had a great dragon conversation the other
Mhm.
night.
Because yeah,
Yeah,
dragons don't come up all that much in The Witcher. Besides that one instance, and once in the second video game, there's no actual dragons. Everything is dragon-like, like a wyvern. But yeah, dragons are a really big deal in the show. Just the design was one of the worst parts of that, though.
Horrible.
That was
it
The
so.
looked
face.
bad.
But
Yeah,
yeah, season one combined both the Last Wish and a Sword of Destiny, and adding in Yennefer and Ciri's storylines on top of that, there was just too
that was
much
like,
going on.
yeah, that whole like detour into the backstory of Ciri's parents. I was like, when is this? Like, what is this? And then Ciri's like in there before too, so it's like you
hmm
don't think there's nothing to clue you in that it's a like a flashback.
Yeah, no, it makes it so difficult sometimes. But I think it's time we talk about the one that Mustang really, really enjoyed, A Grain of Truth, the
Mm.
one that was the best part of season two, but is still awfully done, the one with Nivellen and the Beauty and the Beast
Oh yeah, that's
dark
exactly what it
Oh
fantasy.
was.
yeah.
Yeah, a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
these
I
early
like that
ones
one.
were like later on, the Lesser Evil is a twist on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Like a lot of these
I
are
did.
darker
You know
versions.
what I really liked is that like there was so much inclusion of like classic European like
hmm
folklore. Like I know there's like a lot of Slavic stuff in there, and but like classic European fairy tales too. And I just thought that was so cool because it's like you could just go back and find like all the things, and yeah, that story too. And another thing that was kind of goes with the Polish stuff is I love the naming conventions in this book because it's so different from most fantasy. And I just really appreciate reading something that's fresh and different.
Yeah,
Jed had it confirmed to me because I thought I was seeing it, but there was a lot of Tolkien lore in here too. You could see where the two of them crossed over and met using that true lore from that area of the
hmm
world, and it was
Yeah,
yeah.
like
great
that's
because
so cool.
He
we all
definitely
know what I
loved
love
Tolkien.
Tolkien.
Yeah. No, and
Yeah.
Andre said that he really loves Tolkien as well, and he's not trying to subvert it like George R. R. Martin. So it seems like a
This is
tribute to
yeah, this is
Tolkien.
tribute. This is a pure tribute.
and that'll
Yeah,
come
like
in
that thing
later.
with the elves. Yeah, we'll talk about that one like when we
Yeah,
get
the
there.
the elves, especially in the final book. Once you read the final book in the series chronologically, Mustang, you'll see a lot of Tolkienism with the Ein But I know that you really like Nivellen, Mustang. So, is there anything you want to say about Nivellen's story?
I do, but I don't want to spoil it for people.
Well,
It,
that ship has sailed. This book
yeah,
is a
I
book
know,
review.
I know, I know. I'm so used to trying not to spoil things for people. Unless I hate it, then we know what I'm gonna do then.
I don't remember what story that is.
There's the
It's a
second one.
grain of truth.
Grain of truth.
Okay.
It's what I was talking about. He owned it more so even than the king. He owned what he did because there was a part where Geralt and him were sitting down. And basically Geralt said, "I can reverse this," and he's like, "No, I deserved it." And when they talk about what he actually did to get the curse put on him, I'm sitting there going, "Okay." My first thought is, why did I just see this in the first story, basically a rape scene, sexual crime? I'm seeing it in this one, and I'm going, looking down the line as I've read it, I'm going, he's tying all these things into these are actual, what we would consider the most hideous crimes possible.
Hmm.
And people are being punished for their actions. And they're going back, they are owning it, they're accepting it. And I just loved it. The vampire, when he killed her, I was like, no, don't kill her. That wasn't nice. it's I get
Bruxa,
it, but
yeah.
yeah, could we have not done something else? Was there not some way to say I even felt for her? Because
It was
I
her
know that's
nature.
what's
yeah, it's
good. Yeah, that's the great thing about these books is like, yeah, it makes you care about the villain without having to give them that ridiculous redemption arc
mm,
you get in modern stuff. They don't need a redemption arc. They did something bad. They accept our punishment and they like accept that, hey, maybe Daryl has to kill you. Like,
Hmm.
yeah,
Well, and
and
you go ahead.
both the first two, the king and the villain, I want them to be more. I wanted more of them in the books. I want to see more books written where Geralt comes back and he needs his friends from the past to help him with things, to help his character development. I
Hmm.
know kind of how the books end because you and I've talked about it, but there needs to be more. This is leaving me wanting more, and that is the greatest compliment I could put towards any book. I told you yesterday I compared this to Dune. You know my love for Dune
Hmm.
and the Dune series. It makes me want more. Every time the books came out as I got older, I was like, yes. So
Well,
that's
you know
just
there's
what
give
was
me that
eight of
funny
feeling.
them.
too? It's like you know how like everyone's like we had a modern retelling of whatever. Well, here's a modern retelling of freaking Beauty and the Beast, but
Yep.
the thematic stuff in it, and the guy's like saying, "Hey, I like being this beast guy because you know what? I found that like these guys would just bring me their daughters and they live with me for like a year, and like you know we get along with them, and it was like
I
such a
love that.
subversion of the trope. I know it was awesome. I loved it, and I'm just like this is the kind of retelling we need where you take something that has been like I think the original stories, if you read like the fairy tales and stuff, like they're darker, they had like more
Hmm.
of a like a cultural kind of function, like a warning and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
then you get the distillation that we have now with like Disney crap and stuff like that. There's just mindless children's entertainment with like subliminal messaging. And then you get somebody that actually takes it and puts like the adult themes and the important
Hmm.
questions back into it. And I was like, this is so refreshing to read. I loved it.
Did you
Well,
two
one of my
find?
Oh,
Sorry,
just
Jen.
real fast.
What?
One of my favorite parts was when he was telling the story of that one girl who really liked him, who stayed with him, and when bandits attack, she just strips naked, jumps on his back, and blows a horn, and it scares them all away. I'm just like, that is so random and so weird, but I'm here for it.
That's actually came out of Berserker lore. When I read that, I was like, oh my god, that's straight out of Norse lore.
Well,
Um,
it's actually one of the few scenes that has been illustrated, and it's a beautiful illustration. I can't show it on the stream because she's obviously naked, but yeah, it's a
I
great
can just see it
illustration.
like, yeah.
did you guys get mad at the girls and go, after everything he's doing for her, why the hell did you leave? Stay with the man. I mean, he's making you princesses basically. I was like, you stupid idiots. What is your problem?
Yeah, I
Maybe,
mean it'd be
yeah.
lonely,
Yeah, but
But
it's kind of like goes with the sort of like there's a lot of like relationship and like relationships between men and women kind of commentary in this, and I
Hmm.
think it kind of goes on with the sort of like transactional idea of a relationship, like okay, stay here for a year and then you could go and do whatever. And I think it's like maybe kind of like trying to say something, sometimes people are like I don't know how to explain this. Maybe it's more like the idea of like arranged like marriages or something like that, and maybe
Yes,
it's kind of
yes.
the version of that trope, or yeah.
no, I can definitely see that. And just like we were talking about with Full Test Mustang, the nuance of Novellin is just next level.
Hmm.
Because yes,
Yes.
he did
Hmm.
something horrific. He did something horrible and deserves what he's got, but you feel for him and he feels like a victim despite it all, and you want to
Hmm.
help him. And again, not to compare it to Netflix again, but you lost all that. He was just as soon as Geralt and Ciri found out what he'd done, they're like, "Well, fuck you, we're leaving. We never want to see you again." And Neville's like yelling after them. It's like, no, Geralt actually cared for this man
Hmm.
despite what he'd done. And they also lost the fact in the show that the Bruxa was manipulating him and trying to slave him to
Right.
her wishes. And
Hmm.
so
And
they
they
made the
he knew
Bruxa.
that was wrong too.
So he was doing it to save Nevellin's life, saving him from becoming the monster that the world
Right.
saw him as. It was for his soul. And that's something that The Witcher doesn't do very often. It's normally just, hey, kill the monster, save you from the monster. But it's you're the monster on the outside, but I can stop you from becoming the monster on the inside that this Bruxa wants. And I just love that added depth to it because again, if you just describe this as oh, it's Dark Beauty and the Beast, someone's gonna be like, oh, that sounds whatever, and then they read it. It's like
Yeah.
so much
This
depth with such a simple concept.
this one episode, this one chapter could have been 3 episodes minimum of a show. 3. I'm sitting there going, why aren't we doing the entire time when I'm reading it? I'm sitting there thinking to myself, we could have had 3 episodes here. We could have had probably 4 with the first one. So you got a full season with just 2 and then the prologue. I'm going, why are you? What, these aren't hard to do. These are not high budget productions either, because a
Mm-mm.
lot of this is not CGI. A lot of this is just simple going back to basics of Hollywood and making good story and
The
good scenes and
storytelling.
sets.
But
And they
it's
could
so
have used,
easy to like say, "Hey, we got like Henry Cavill, and he's like an action star." I mean, I've seen it. Like
mhm,
the funny, ironically, the movies I've seen him in are not where he's like super action hero, so that's kind of weird. But I was just like, okay, it's like basically they took what the novel is on its the most surface level, where it's like monster of the week, like hot
mhm.
guy action star, like throwing some women, like we're cool.
That's
I,
what
I
season 1 was. Season 2 was
yeah,
that.
Two, yeah, I have not watched it
I
unfortunately,
kept picturing Novellin's
or maybe that's
castle.
fortunately.
I kept picturing Novellin's castle as a Scottish castle,
Hmm.
and having the winter and everything there. I'm like, you could have done it with a real castle. You could have had
Yeah.
this whole thing here. The temple, there are great temples over there. You could have made it a druid temple. You could have done everything right there in England.
Hmm. It
I
was
don't even
it
know what
was
the fuck
all
make
there.
castles.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing. That's why the show is so much more disappointing to me than other
Mhm.
shows in the same vein, like maybe Rings of Power or House of the Dragon. It wasn't always all there for them, and it wasn't as straightforward. They're still horrifically managed and terribly made, but The Witcher, it was as straightforward and simple as you can have it, and they
Mhm.
still managed to mess it up royally. And
Yes.
that's what it's just so much more disappointing to me personally.
This might
And
be like a weird like comparison, but it really reminded me of like the really good episodes of like the Twilight Zone, where it was something
Yes.
that was really compact, and they would give you like a very deep, like thematic statement on something that was like
mm-hmm.
maybe like had real worlds kind of parallels or something, and
Oh,
I just was like, it had that kind of like, damn, that's some good storytelling.
yeah, it had Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, and Night Gallery kind of all rolled in for me. And those were 3 of
Yeah.
my favorite shows growing up as a kid, even though I wasn't supposed to watch them.
Yeah. Well, these short stories they did come out during that later era. Like the Last Wish was published in 1993, but the short stories were coming out for years before that. That's just when he decided to put it all together. I think The Witcher came out in 85, and so it's a lot older of a fantasy than the stuff that we're dealing with right now with the majority of these new shows like Willow and
Okay, Sonny,
But
how old
that
do you think I am?
Narrative life isn't the same thing as human life, but it's just a different mindset. Is more what I mean than anything. The '80s were a very different time than
Yes,
we have today,
this
and
would have been made right.
it's a cliche at this point, but you couldn't make The Witcher accurate these days in current Hollywood
No,
for most of these
no.
studios. But we can move on to the lesser evil, and this is one of the ones that people think of as most because it's what featured the pilot of the Netflix show, and it has one of my favorite lines from the entire series. It's there. Evil is evil, greater, lesser, middling. It's all the same,
the
and
lesser of two evils is still evil, like I love to say.
Mhm. That's Geralt's perspective on everything because that's what Witchers are. They're explicitly
Yeah.
neutral on everything. That is their role. They do not take part in politics, even though Geralt kind of is forced to sometimes. Just normally, the Witcher code is neutrality in all things and not differentiating between evil. Evil is evil. And it comes down to the classic trolley problem in a fantasy setting. I'm sure we're all familiar with the trolley problem. It's the go to how do you tell if you're a good person moral conundrum that doesn't have a good solution, and
Oh yeah.
this is it on a massive scale with Stregobor and Renfrey. And Renfrey you really feel bad for, especially by the end when she's basically like, yeah, you're gonna kill me, but I just can't stop. This is all I am,
Oh
and if I
yeah,
am a
it's that
monster.
that's the story with the chick that's like total like crazy evil.
Yeah. Yeah. So a
Yes,
recap of it: Geralt shows up in a town. He has a vampire head and Ikimara head, and the town doesn't want it, so they send him to the sorcerer. The sorcerer's like, "Hey, this chick I tortured as a child is here to kill me. Why don't you kill all of them? That's a lesser evil."
Yeah.
And she's under the cursed sun, is what I believed it was called. And it was just you were born at a certain time. It's astrology on the next level. It's like if you were born under the right sign, you were cursed to be a mutant. And we never find out if they actually are mutants or not, or if it's just superstition. And that's another case of the ambiguity, just like the
I
Striga.
know, I love that about it because it's like you never it's almost like, oh, what was that thing I was watching where it's like um God, what was it? It's like you don't know. I can't forget what it was called. Oh my God! But it's like you don't know if the person is truly evil or if they're just fulfilling the prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was Willow. Oh, why am I forgetting this? Because it's
Is
like
Willa?
you know, like Allura Dannon. It's like, oh
Uh-huh.
yeah, she's gonna destroy the queen. Well, would she ever do that, or is it literally because these people's psychological mindset made them so worried about her that the queen ended up destroying herself?
Right.
And that was like the question here. It was like this person really evil, or like were the like beliefs that people had turned her into the monster? So it really makes you think like the whole thing question is like who is the monster here and who isn't. It's like it's so great because it's like you're in that situation and you're like, okay, this is a magical world. There could be curses. I could buy that, but then you start thinking about it and you're like, dude, what if it wasn't and it's just everyone's like group think going after her and she would have
Mm-hmm.
been fine otherwise. Oh,
Well,
it's so intense.
there's the curse aspect, and then it's a matter of comparison between what is more evil, torturing a child or just indiscriminately killing peasants to get a wizard out of a
Yeah.
tower. Like they both are extremely evil, and so like a clear cut lesser evil isn't clear. Like Stregobor probably deserves to be punished for what he did, but
yes.
Yeah.
Geralt isn't willing to be judge, jury, and executioner. But he has to stop Renfrey from killing the marketplace. And so it's on a moral level who's the monster as well as who's cursed to be a monster. There's just a lot of complexity there. And
Yeah.
it's Snow White. Like the huntsman tried to grape her as well. Thing that she included in her backstory and the seven gnomes. And it's just another cool twist that you'd never think you'd actually have seen before.
It reminded
And
me of medieval Europe when certain children born this way or certain children born that way, they were cursed. They were going to grow up to be evil, destroy the world. It was a society. So I looked at it and I was going into it from this perspective of she's not evil.
mm-mm,
She's just a person that's had to make their way in the world, but they've branded her as evil. Stragaborn, to me, was evil
mm-hmm.
because of what he did. It's just,
Well,
it's
for,
hard to. Go ahead.
for historical reference, I think you'll get this Mustang. The a historical figure that this storyline reminded me of was Ivar the Boneless. You familiar with Ivar?
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar, Lady B?
I vaguely know the story.
All right. So he was among the Vikings who immigrated to England, were doing those ratings. It's
Yeah,
a little bit iffy whether or not he lived in Norway or lived in England, but he was born super premature and he was deformed to hell and back. Like
yeah,
he was never going to walk, and his bones were so brittle that if he did anything, he was going to break all his bones. And it was used as a sign that he was cursed by the gods and should have been left out in the snow as soon as he was born. But his father decided to spare his life, and he did end up turning out to be one of the most ruthless military commanders in
Mm-hmm.
history. Like one of his famous tactics was, if we just kill 500 men, we just kill 500 men. But if we injure 500 men, then 1,000 men have to come and rescue them. And then that's 1,500 men within our power. And so was he the monster because of birthright, because of cursed by the gods? Or did he become the monster because everyone believed he was? And
Neither.
Ivar the Boneless was pretty messed up. He did some pretty messed up stuff. But
For the
it's that
time, he
nuance.
he did what he had to. He
Oh
did
yeah,
what he
yeah, for
had
the
to.
time period. But it's that same type of nuance that I saw in Renfrey. It's like
Mm-hmm.
she felt like she really needed to take out Stregobor, and he probably deserved everything that he had coming to him. So it's just a tie-in that I
I
don't know if it
know.
was
It's
intended that I
so
saw.
yeah, you're
Well,
just so like, maybe you should both go away. Oh my,
Just
that was,
just make it a duel. That's
what
why
yeah,
those were
I,
great.
I have to go back to the show, and when they're talking, in the books, they don't ever say if it was a curse or if there was ever proven to be or anything like that. It's very
mm-mm.
ambiguity. But in the shows, it's like, oh yeah, I've autopsied all these people and they were all that way. It's like, why did they do that in the show? That made no sense. This was much better version because we don't know. It's
And
up to
that's
the reader.
Mhm. And that's something that a lot of modern writers struggle with in Hollywood is the idea that there's something that the audience doesn't want to know. The perfect example for me is with Doctor Who, with the timeless children. We don't want to know the Doctor's origin story. We don't want to meet his mother. We don't know
Mhm.
how he was born. We don't want to know his past because that's what makes him so great is his ambiguity, his mysterious factor. And they assume, oh, you just want to know everything. It's like, no, there are some things that we specifically don't want the answers to, and that's essential to the story standing in the way that it does. And The
Yeah.
Witcher, The Last Wish, really exemplifies that very, very well, in my opinion.
Oh, I found like I had put some stickies on here, but this is a good thing, a quote about monsters, and this is when he's talking to Dan Billiam. He says, Gerald, he said suddenly, but monsters do exist. Maybe not as many as before. Maybe they don't lurk behind every tree in the forest, but they are there. They exist. So how do you account for people inventing ones then? What's more, believing in what they invent? A famous witcher? Haven't you wondered why? I have, famous poet, and I know why. I'm curious. People, Geralt turned his head, like to invent monsters and monstrosities. They seem less monstrous themselves when they get blind, drunk, cheat, steal, beat their wives, starve an old woman, when they kill a trapped fox with an axe, or riddle the last existing unicorn with arrows. They like to think that Bane entering cottages at daybreak is more monstrous than they are. They feel better then. They find it easier to live. I'm like, that's like really like the thematic thing of this whole book. Like, it's so dang.
That is something I have actually said for years to people. People will ask about. Well, they see things on news. There's a discussion going on the forums right now that I'm part of, discussing, and I'm not going to get into it because YouTube won't be nice, but
Right.
it's discussing bad people and what they do to children in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
And there will always be evil in this world. And my point in it is the person brought up, you see it all the time on the media. Yes, you're seeing it all the time in the media, but the actual relevant cases is very few and compared to how many teachers there are. And in this story, I was looking at it going, compared to how many people are in the world, the actual evil is very small. But bards in this story, the media in our world, they will spread it and make it giant, and it's like it's in your face all the time, and people don't get the perspective. And this story put that into perspective in that. And that's what I try and get across to people when they go, oh, the world we live in is so bad. I'm like, no, it's not. It's we are being bombed. And if you disconnect yourself from watching the news all the time,
Yeah.
reading the paper, or going on the internet and looking for it, you will find out that people are very good. They are generally loving,
Mm-hmm.
caring, and the amount of bad that is in the world, it could be anything from teachers, firefighters, policemen, priests, anybody could be bad. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what this story really, to me, did come in and hit home, because I've been saying that for years, is anybody could be bad. And society labeling everybody under bad because of a sign in this, or in the case on the forum right now, oh, it's teachers. No, it's not true. It really is not
Yeah, that's
true.
really comes out in this book because of the whole, like, I'm really interested in this because I remember the whole dragon hunt from the show and it seems so
Mm-hmm.
topical, but like as I keep reading this, it's like I thought like, okay, he's gonna go on the hunt because Yennefer is there, but like it seems like really there's something else that's not her, and I'm
Mhm.
only on the second chapter, and I'm really curious about what his like what he's gonna do. And I honestly I don't remember the show because I saw it when it came out, and I just want to keep reading it and
Yeah.
go, but that was interesting. But like there's like so much interesting thematic stuff in here, and I was looking at my other thing I kept out, and it was about the elf story. So, or should I save it for when we get there?
Yeah, we're almost there. We've only got one more short story till then. Well,
Oh yeah,
before we move on to a lesser evil or a question of price, want to add on to what Mustang was saying. If I can apply what you're saying to the pop culture sphere, sometimes
Mhm.
people just black pill so completely, and it's just easier to give up. Sometimes it's easier to act like nothing is worth doing, and that's a perspective that I completely understand why people would go there. Hope, as cliche as it sounds, hope is difficult. Hope is
Never give up on
incredibly
hope, though.
and
Never.
it's an active emotion. It's not a passive emotion, but giving up is very passive. And so I really like how you put that. Yeah, it's blackpilling.
and one thing that it's a huge like thematic thing that goes across in fantasy, like Wheel of Time, is like the whole thing with like the main character that has to save the world is that he realizes like yeah you can it's basically he gets black pilled, realizes you can have hope, and that realizing people can have second chances, and it's in this book but in a different way.
It
Hmm.
only takes one person to change the world.
It's that
It
simple.
really does.
Well, we can move on to a question of price, and you guys don't know this yet, but a question of price is probably the most important short story in The Last Wish because it has implications that reach all the way to the final book in the series. There are revelations that explain a question of price to a deeper level that you don't understand until the final book, and it's just an extra level. Tower of the Swallow or Lady of the Lake, and it's just insane. By the time you reach that point, you're like, holy shit, that was in a question of price. I don't know if he
Which
was
one is
planning
that
this.
story?
And so that's the story about Sintra. Calanthe brings Geralt to her court. She seems to know something's
Oh
going on.
yes, that one, the
It's all about the
series like
marriage of her
board game
daughter.
story.
Yeah, it's a series parents.
Oh
And
my god, when I read that, it was like, why didn't they make it more freaking clear in the show? Like, oh my goodness.
Mhm.
they were just trying to confuse you with the timelines. It was intentional befuddlement. And it's just, it's
It was
awful what
so
they did.
interesting because it's like the whole like price, the whatever child price already called it, it's like, oh yeah, Gerald just comes back and claims it too.
Hmm.
What I
And
had
it's
to
like
add.
I
Oh, go ahead, Finn. Sorry.
oh no, I just it just made so much sense because I knew from the show what like Siri was going to become, and then I'm like, oh my god, it makes so much sense now because he saw somebody that had a lot of magical potential. He realized if she was like with the magic happening that she was obviously pregnant,
Yeah,
and then
you
this
you
child
lose.
would have magic in it in her, and he could use it for like he could have name his own price.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that they really changed in the show. They made it seem like he like, oh, I don't want anything from you guys. Oh, I don't want anything. And then in passing, he's like, fine, just give me what you got. That's your surprise, whatever. And then she
Yeah, the
vomits.
way
And he's
they
like, oh,
said it,
pregnant. But but in the books, it was intentional. Geralt knew what he was doing. He knew what he was asking,
I
and that
know. It's like
changes
I
so
hate
much
when
about
they
his
change
person.
stuff like that to make a character seem less competent. Oh my goodness. They do
Hmm.
that in House of the Dragon so much.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, that was so interesting in that because it was just one of those things because you're like, here's a story where everyone's gonna get a happy ending, and then you get this, and it's like he's kind of saying, well, not so fast, you two. It's like you two get to go together, you be together, and you can have your happy ending. The curse will be lifted, but you guys need to pay a price too. And so he comes and claims it, and I thought that was so interesting.
Well, and the most important part of this is actually lore related. That's why I'm harping on Blood Origin a lot, because this story, even in the Witcher show, won't make sense without the setup that Blood Origin is glossing over. But the Witchers are on a downcline. Like in that quote that you read, monsters are receding. There's less and less monsters in the world. There's less need for Witchers, and the Witchers are dying off as a result. And so it's
Yeah.
a matter of him perpetuating his species, basically. And so that's why he's very intentionally like, I need this daughter. I need someone born in the shadow of destiny, because they don't describe it until later, but it's not a spoiler. The reason it's better to have a Witcher born in the shadow of destiny, it's not essential, but it's better because the trial of the grasses that makes you a Witcher, that mutates you, is such a devastating thing that you go through, that the mortality rate is massive. But if you're
Yeah, I
already in the
picked that
shadow
up
of
from reading
destiny,
it.
you have it's like fate trying to keep you alive. And so you have a better chance of surviving the trial of the grasses if you have a destiny you're going towards, because
It's
the
like
world
being
will fight you.
Taviran in like Wheel of Time. It's like the plot armor that actually works with the plot.
Yeah, it's built-in plot armor that works really well. But yeah, that's something that you're going to miss out because of how Blood Origin is going to destroy that.
I had to ask
Yeah.
Jed about the Queen's magic because I was like, wait a minute. She didn't know before now that she was a magical being, and that just completely took me by surprise. Whereas in the show, I was like, she knows. I mean, you knew she knew. In the
Well,
books, I was like, whoa, this is so much better
Yeah.
because she didn't know, and it surprised everybody.
Well, it's another example of something that's going to be explained later in Baptism of Fire. They explain how the bloodline came to Pavetta, the elder bloodline, what Calanthe knew, what Calanthe didn't know, some accidental incest, and like there's just so much about this story that has lasting repercussions throughout the
Uh-huh.
entire series,
And
even
it's
into the
a
video
story
games.
that does a lot of like world building too. Like it gives you information about the Witchers, it gives you information about like the magic system and like curses and stuff like that, and the whole like how that manifests. And it's just interesting. Like there's so much. Like I mean, I like the way that like they don't dump it all on you. It's like they talk about like in the first story, it's like okay, he's gonna go attack the Striga, so he like drinks something, and then in one of the Voice of Reason chapters, you get like him out with what's her name, the priestess lady in
Nanika,
the garden, and
Danica.
they're picking stuff, and then they give you more information about the stuff that they're picking, and also about like how that grows and stuff like that. It's like that's how you do it right, guys.
This is a let the audience or the reader in this case
hmm
figure everything out and learn as they go, and that's what I really appreciated.
Well, and since we're on the topic of magic and figuring things out, one of the biggest criticisms with the concept of witchers that I've come across is their ability to use magic to a limited extent. I've heard some weird ones recently, like Mustang. Well, we've come across someone who's not okay with them being sterile, but the
Oh,
more common one is the magical abilities. How have you guys felt the inclusion of his signs, or what they called like Ard, Igni, Yrden, are incorporated in the story? Does it feel natural that Geralt should be able
Yeah,
to do these
it's
things?
like yeah, I don't understand. Like they don't explain really anything. It's kind of like okay, get in the bus. We're going to do some magic. Like who cares? It just works. It doesn't need an explanation. And I think when authors like trip up, like this is my main criticism of Brandon Sanderson, is he tries to explain so much of it. So in like Alloy of Love, for example, you have a guy like trying to say, I need to jump, I need to basically be Magneto and fly over a balcony, but I have to throw this bullet so I can use my mass adjustment to try to change it. And it's like, dude, just say he jumped over the thing. And that's what they say in The Witcher. He made this sign, like this sigil or whatever it was. He spoke it, and it kind of worked with the magic. And I think like that kind of stuff really comes in with the Yennefer story, because you
Mhm.
could see like he has magic like to an extent, but like
It's very
he's
limited.
not that strong. Like,
It's a thing with Witchers because they were actually designed to be magic wielding warriors. And so the initial experiment is actually considered a failure because they're not mages. They can do a couple hand signs that are like the basic day one type spell. And there's actually some criticism in the magical influence that you're talking about with the Yennefer storyline. He does heliotrope, and you cast that sign by crossing your arms. and apparently that's been co-opted by the Black Panther movies now. So only black people are allowed to cross their arms like this
Heliotrope.
anymore.
I
But
just took him as from Celtic lore. He's giving Celtic signs to fight off demons, which,
Or
if you know
like
your Norse
Nordic
history, that's
stuff
what
with
they did.
voodoo and stuff. Yeah, I didn't think that was weird, and I actually like that he wasn't like extremely competent with it. Like, okay, you kind of
Mm-mm.
suck at that. Like,
Hmm.
that's cool. I like limitations. Like, that's cool.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
the signs aren't that great, to be honest.
I found nothing wrong with it. I mean, the whole story is The Witcher. He's got some kind of powers. We don't need it explained to us. Matter of fact, please don't. Let me just go. Okay, he's a semi-magical being.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I need to know. That's all I need to know, and we could go on from here now. It's
We can.
we don't need
Yeah.
somebody to come and say, "Here is our magical box. This is what's in the box. Don't forget this is in the box." How about just telling us a good story and leave it up to us and say, "Okay, he's magical. That's all we need."
It's magical. They do explain it for the people who want it, but yeah, at least initially, it's just like, hey, there's explanations if you want it. If you just want to sit back and
Mhm.
enjoy it, go for it. It gives you the option, and I really like that.
As
But
far as him being sterile, that puts so much more nuance into a character.
I didn't realize he was like. I realized the whole Yennefer thing was, which was
Mhm.
I was hoping to talk about it because I thought that was so interesting to have a story about that, like
Mhm.
in context of like modern feminism and stuff. And do we want to go there or do we?
we have the Edge of the World to do real fast.
Oh, let's do
That,
Edge of the World. Okay.
yeah, that's the Elven one, and
That's fun.
the first thing I want to say is this storyline takes place right out in the mountains outside of Dablethana, or the Valley of Flowers. It's supposed to be the most beautiful location in the entire continent. Do you remember anything like that in the show? Remember a beautiful Valley of Flowers?
No, I remember
Dablethana?
it was freaking ugly. Like, it was like Southern California or something.
It reminded me of the Badlands of Southern California. It
Yeah,
was sparse
not the
and
most beautiful land in the world. It's
no.
called the Valley of Flowers in Elvish, Dablethana.
Yeah, I'm thinking someplace in New Zealand would have been a good place to shoot. Just
Probably.
offhand.
I don't
Probably.
know, somewhere green, somewhere that looks like verdant and fucking with their fields and yeah, like you're not getting anything out of that area.
No,
No,
no.
no, no,
I
no.
got Badlands, so I didn't get anything lush.
Well,
Yeah.
I know you had a lot of things you want to talk about, Lady B, about the elves. It's definitely a very unique portrayal of elves, so I was interested in what you had
Yeah.
to say about them.
Yeah, it was interesting and it's like when he talks to Philandrel. I'm trying to make sure I find it.
Oh, Phil Evandrel is such a good character, and then they made him such a massive character in the TV show. It's like he's really
Yeah,
not
it's like
around all
they
that
go through
much.
this. It's kind of interesting because it's like I know a little bit about Slavic mythology and the idea of like Perun, the god of the All Father and the forest, kind of a god, and people actually carve trees to look like this god, which is I think where George R. R. Martin stole that idea
Yeah, I
from.
get.
But yeah, and it's kind of giving me that idea of this kind of like there's this old tradition of that's more like animalistic and in tune with nature versus like the newer stuff with like other things, and that was interesting. But one Phil Phil Evandriel like is talking to Gerald after he's caught him, and he says, "That's what you want, isn't it?" With his wrist, Phil Evandriel wiped away the sweat above his white brows. "Is that what you want to impose on others? The conviction that your time has come, your human era and age, and that what you're doing to other races is natural as the rising and setting of the sun? That everyone has come to terms with it, to accept it, and you accuse me of vanity? And what are the views you're proclaiming? Why don't you humans finally realize that your domination of the world is as natural and repellent as lice multiplying on a sheepskin coat? You could propose we cohabit with lice and get the same reaction, and I'd listen to the lice as attentively as if they, in return for acknowledgement of their supremacy, were agreed to allow common use of the coat." And Geralt says, "So don't waste time discussing it with such an unpleasant insect elf," said the Witcher, barely able to control his voice. "I'm surprised you want to arouse a feeling of guilt and repentance in such a louse as me. You're pitiful, Philavandriel. You're embittered, hungry for revenge, and conscious of your own powerlessness. Go on, thrust the sword into me. Revenge yourself on the whole human race. You'll see what relief that'll bring you. First kick me in the balls and teeth, like Toruviel." And I thought that was such an interesting like comeback because it's got like the whole man versus nature, but the like Gerald's response is just such a great thing with how like people nowadays they get compartmentalized and we get like so into identity politics, and it's like he's just saying, like, the reason why you're attacking me is because you're powerless yourself. And I think that's where a lot of, like, this sort of, like, artificially induced anger and outrage comes from, is people just feeling like they have no power with themselves. And, like, Gerald's like, hey, you know, it's like, we're all just kind of screwed here. It's like, you could wake up and, like, get with us. So,
Well, this storyline is another example of why once you figure out the lore, it means so much more. Like you got the story, you got what you needed to about them, but once you know what happened to the elves and their actual storyline, it's just as much Phil Vandrel hating on himself as the humans
yeah.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
and it's the classic accuse your enemy of what you're doing to yourselves. That whole like hey, you think it's normal for you guys to dominate everything, destroying everything in your path? That's exactly what the elves did to the dwarves and gnomes when they arrived at the age of migration. That's what they did. And
That's
he's
interesting. I
actually
haven't gotten there.
and he's one of the few elves who was alive during the time of the conjunction of the spheres. And at that event, elves started to devolve. So he hates himself because he used to be like an angel. Before the conjunction, angels or elves were basically angels.
Oh, I
And
see
so
that kind of Tolkienianism there
uh-huh.
coming in.
Mhm.
Exactly. And so in the millennia since then, he's seen himself become like a man, the thing that he hates most at this point. And so it's just as much you're a louse as calling himself that because that's what he views himself as because he's barely different than a human at this point. He's got 20 years and he lives a little bit longer. That's all he's got. Before the conjunction, him and his people were angels like unto gods. And so you get that extra level as he
Yeah,
doesn't
and then
actually
you have
hate.
that, like, goat man monster kind of intermediary between them, because he's trying to give them all of the stuff that the humans have left as offerings to try to help them, and saying, hey, if you guys just acted more like men, you'd actually survive if you could get off of your freaking high horse and just, like, yeah.
I
You need
like
to
the point
accept the
that
will.
yeah, I like the point that Geralt knew going into it his life was never truly in danger, but he never let on, and well, at least I never got the sense that he let on that he knew his life wasn't in danger. He knew it was promised, but he also knew Philandriel's honor would prevent him from actually killing
Mhm.
him. And that's something that is people I think miss from the show is Philandriel's actually very honorable. He would not he may have threatened, he may have got mad, but he would never have done it. And Geralt knew that about the man's inside, just that short encounter. He already knew. It was being able to read somebody and get that out of it. And it's like, that's so perfect. He knew. He knew. And you can see the
Mhm.
anger because you knew Geralt wasn't really in danger, so you can see the anger inside Phil Bandriel. It was a great chapter.
Well, it
Yeah, and
shows
then that,
Geralt's intelligence.
Yes.
and then the interesting thing is that you have, like, the goat man, who's kind of like your prototypical pan looking kind of thing, and he's kind of the intermediary between, like, Geralt and the, like, elves, and then he's like the intermediary within the humans and the elves, which is interesting because I think it's kind of like a metaphor for the, like, man versus nature theme in this story, because he's always a go-between. So he's the one that's saying, hey, instead of, like, attacking the humans, you could just work with them and use them like you would. He's kind of like, he kind of reminds me of that I can't think of the name because I just started reading about Slavic mythology, but there are certain, like, deities associated with, like, the harvest and stuff, and the whole idea is that man can work in tune with nature.
Uh-huh.
And I
Mm.
really saw it in that thing, and that was what was interesting with the, like, kind of monster that this guy was. They said it was a devil, but then he comes out and he looks kind of like this half man, half, like,
Yeah,
goat kind
Sylvan.
of a thing. Yeah, and I thought that was interesting that he even called it a sylving, because that's, like, kind of a Latin word for, like, forest and stuff like that. So there's just a lot of interesting, a lot to digest in that one little
Mhm.
story. A lot of good information in there. So.
The 45 minutes I think it took me to get through that was, well, they could have made this Avatar and done a better movie than the new Avatar. Oh,
Well, it shows complexity on both sides of the argument.
yeah.
There's nuances. Like humans, they've got to survive, and that comes at the expense of the elves at some point. And the elves, they've got to fight back, and that comes at the expense of the humans sometimes. And it's just some complexity that we don't get in modern storytelling, like Avatar.
Uh-huh.
And
Or even in, like, Tad Williams, like the Dragon Bone shared, like,
mm,
story in the whole trilogy, it's like it's kind of like the same thematic thing, but it, like, leads more to the Avatar side. So it
mm.
misses the nuance.
Well, since this isn't in the book, so it's not canon or spoilers for the books. There's a character in the games called Yorvith, who's the extreme of who Phil Evandrel could have become. He's a straight up
Ooh.
terrorist. He's Scoia'tael is their terrorist cell, is what they're called, is the Scoia'tael, which means squirrels. And he's gone full ham, hates the elves or hates humans for the same reason, but he's straight up murdering them indiscriminately. He's killed more men than Geralt's eaten chickens before. That's the reference that they use.
So
And
Jennifer
Wow.
Sulky?
Jennifer Sulky, yeah, basically. But once you reach that game, you see if Phil Evandrel didn't have his honor, if he didn't know what it was like to be an elf before the conjunction, he would have turned into Yorvith.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an interesting two sides of the same coin that you get with the games. That's why I always say people, you need to play the games too, because it is a continuation. They are sequels, and you get so much more development for these short stories for someone like Phil Evandrel, because you see how much his honor was keeping him from being a monster. You see what would have become.
Yeah, it's clear in this channel, in this very chapter, his honor meant everything to him.
And you know
All
what's
he had
interesting
left?
about that is going about that first quote I read about like sometimes men like make monsters or they can be made into monsters, and that he was almost doing his job as a witcher there to keep somebody from taking that step. So in a lot of ways, like in the story, its job is not just to, hey, I'm just gonna go slay beasts, but like I'm going to help you guys be better people so you don't become the monstrous person, which is interesting.
There's a line for that in The Witcher 3 when he comes across some intelligent monsters and they're about to kill him, and he's like, I'm the, just like you were saying with the Sylvan, I'm not of neither the human world nor the monster world. I represent both and protect both, because there are things of value within the monster world that should be of value. Monsters like the Sylvan, they don't deserve to die. There are other monsters like that, like godlings as well, and the golden dragons, and it's like witchers are there to protect both worlds from hurting each other, being that intermediary. And I
Wow, that's really
didn't get that from
interesting.
Netflix at all.
No,
Geralt, he wasn't intelligent like he was in this. He's not the master investigator tracker that he was in the books. He's just a mindless killing machine for most of it, and that's not who Geralt is. He's the man who can look at an elf and see how important his honor is. Just so much depth.
Mm.
And it's, again, a very simple story with not really any action. It's just, if you said, oh yeah, Geralt came across some elves who were hiding and then they let him go, that's the basic plot. But then it
That
Oh,
comes
was
he
down
the
to
got
the
kicked in the nuts like
characters.
yeah.
yeah, that
all
was
the
the show, and that was stupid. I
it's
didn't
all
get it.
about character work for
Uh,
all these short stories. They're not complicated plot wise, but they're so
mhm.
complicated character wise, and that's what makes them magic for me.
Well, in the show, the fawn was more honorable than the king, and I was just going, that don't seem right. And they made him so stupid too, and he was very intelligent.
Yeah, Foltest, he knew exactly what
Mhm.
was going on. He's like, yeah, they probably paid you to not kill my daughter, or to actually kill her, didn't they? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
they did. Yeah, I knew that. Yeah, Foltest, he's a great character that goes forward into the story. But I think we're ready to come up onto the last one, the one that gives the short story, or this collection, its name, The Last Witch, where we
Oh
meet
my god,
Yennefer of
that was
Vengerberg. And
woo,
I,
Jennifer. Woo!
I just want to say that Yennefer as a person, I hate with a flaming passion. Like, if I met her in real life, I'd want to
Yeah,
bitch slap her, honestly. But
yeah,
as a character, I love her as a character. So it's a weird
yeah,
dynamic between me and Yennefer when I'm engaging with the stories. God, I hate
yeah,
her, but she's so great with Geralt.
yeah.
Now this one I'm
I
not
was
all the
trying.
way through yet, so there may be stuff I'm not getting out of this chapter.
Well, from a mythology standpoint, when she finds her line, what did you think of the portrayal of the Jinn at the very beginning?
I thought that was so interesting because it's like I've been trying to. I usually I keep like I look if I see a word I don't know or something I'll just look it up or some reference or something, but I didn't at the time, and I wasn't looking up all the different creatures. But I probably will reread it again and do that. But I just thought, whoa, that's interesting because jinns are very like Middle Eastern kind of
Hmm.
mythology, and I
Mhm.
was like, oh, that's interesting. He's really going with a bunch of different stuff, and I thought that was interesting.
For the myth part, messing with a djinn is never a good idea.
Oh
And
my
I
goodness.
was sitting there thinking to myself, this will not end good. That's just I haven't seen how it ends, but I know it can't end good.
Well, that's what Dandelion provides to the story. He's the chaos factor. He just wants a good story to tell. So, hey, don't mess with the Gen. Oh, but it'd be cool if I did, though.
Yeah, I know.
And I love
Like,
his
no.
3 wishes. Like, some people would be like, "Oh, I want unlimited power. Oh, I want this." And he's like, "I want you to kill my bard friend because he's a dick. And I want this woman to accept my advances." It's like, why do you start with that? It is so Dandelion, though. It's like, yeah, kill
Yeah,
that.
I know. It's so funny. Oh my gosh.
It gives humor
Yeah,
to the
I
book
love
that
how
hadn't had a lot.
I was trying to find it because I love how they write there's like sex scene in it, and it's like he interrupted her with a kiss, an embrace, a touch, caresses, and then with everything, his whole being, his every thought, his only thought, everything, everything, everything. They broke the silence with sighs and the rustle of clothing strewn on the floor. They broke silence very gently, lazily, and they were considerate and very thorough. They were caring and tender, and although neither quite knew what caring and tenderness were, they succeeded because they very much wanted to, and they were in no hurry whatsoever. The whole world had ceased to exist for a brief moment, but to them it seemed like a whole eternity. I mean, it's so wonderful because it tells you so much about them, and it's not even graphic, and you can just use your imagination.
Yeah. That's
It was
the
so
thing.
beautiful. I love that part.
Like how you're saying, it speaks a lot to their character. They've never experienced anything like this before. Even though they just met, it's something special because they're both bit of hound dogs. Like they get around, both of them. Both of them really get around. But this was just something next level for them right off the bat. And it's never really explained why they have such a good connection, and it doesn't need to be. It's just sometimes you meet people that you connect with at a further level. And
Mhm.
the thing that most people come out of this with Lady B is a bit of confusion on what the last wish actually was. I've talked to a lot of people who have no idea what it was.
Yeah, I think from the context, it's like it was something that would tie her fate to his so that she wouldn't die.
That's exactly what it was. It's that
And
my
that
fate
his
would be the
act of
same of hers.
yeah, is that like his selflessness in that act is what like kind of cracked her facade.
Hmm. It's
And
exactly
I'm
what
just
it is.
saying somebody would do something, which I think her as a character, yeah, she's not a nice person. I don't like her on that part, but her as a character is just so interesting because what I was saying about like modern feminism and stuff is that's like you have a woman here and like she traded like the greatest gift I guess she thinks now is like her fertility to become a sorceress for magical power and become beautiful and stuff like that. So it's kind of a very like modern women thing. Like, you know, they go in and like, you know, have a career, like focus on yourself. Don't think about like love or anything else. Don't have kids. Don't start a family. Just you do you, you know, do your thing. And then
Hmm.
you come to a point in your life where it's like, okay, I want something different, but you're
Hmm.
really old now. You're older, and maybe like with regular people, like you're not like you know they age and they're not gonna
Yeah.
look as nice. But it's like I think that's interesting in her character because she's even described like she's beautiful, but if you look closely at her, she is like she's got flaws, and it's clear if you knew she was a sorceress that she probably started off like really ugly, and like the Gerald knew like
Use a
because of
hunchback.
that like oh she was a hunchback, and like it just makes it even more of like an allegorical thing, like the woman who gave up everything for her career now wants to have kids and she can't. And I just think that's like an insanely like on topic like modern thing, and I kind of like related to that just being like you know at one point in time I was
Yeah.
really into the like lies of feminism and stuff, and I was just like damn,
Well,
I don't think there's many authors out there that would touch a theme like that with a 10-foot pole. Because
mm-mm.
everything Yennefer is trying to do with the Jinn and other stuff is like she just wants to have kids. And it's like, damn, that simple request is just I was like, whoa. I was just so surprised by that.
Yeah. Well, something that you'll figure out later, she's actually 75 in the last wish. So she's had plenty of time for herself. She had a lot of time for herself. But this is a question that I always ask people when they get to this point. Do you feel like you understand Yennefer's story better just in this section versus actually seeing her as a hunchback and all the stuff in the show that they made up?
I don't need
Um
to see her as a hunchback.
Because yeah, Geralt
I
just looks at her and is like, "Oh, you used to be a hunchback."
Mhm.
That single line is what they made Yennefer's season 1 story from. That's
That's
what they
all I
built it
needed.
off.
I know. I don't feel like you needed to see it. I haven't read the rest of it, so I can't give you like I used to say if this is a problem, here's how I could fix it, but I haven't read for it, so I don't know what is in there. But it could be something you could use as like a flashback to have, like to explain why she's like that. I mean, it is kind of hard. It would be kind of hard to like visually represent that to say, oh, somebody's pretty, but if you look at her, she's not that pretty, like kind of thing. I thought that was a really interesting description, especially in terms of like modern women, and that's like there's always like, well, you're wearing makeup, so you're lying or something like that, and I don't like. I think that's kind of a dumb idea, but like in today's day and age on the internet, oh, here's a filter for this or that, and
Well,
we're
and I
always
think
trying to do the sorcery.
I think an important part of this story going into it fresh is not knowing whether or not she can be trusted. But if you see the
Uh-huh.
show, you've already seen her whole backstory by this point. You already know she's a good person. And so the ambiguity, and you don't get Geralt's perspective on this. And that was so valuable in this short story is it's another magic wielder. I have such bad experience with them. She's going to turn out to betray me. She's going to be awful. And she does betray him, but for good reasons that he cares about. And he ends up saving her. But if you get all that backstory beforehand, the tension that's at the heart of this story is lacking, in my
I
opinion.
know, and the tension too, because it's like the whole thing is he doesn't know this woman. He has no reason to trust her, but he's such a good person that he would still like make that last wish, hence the name of the book, to save somebody else's life, which is like kind of like when you've gone through something in so much ambiguity with like who's the good guy and the bad guy, it's like when somebody's actions do that, and it isn't like the author has to tell us again he's a good person. It's like he's a good person because he would be willing to do that.
Well,
like
and you,
And the subtext goes in the next book too with the dragon story when they meet 4 years later.
I like the fact that they went with the love at first sight. That is something most authors can't get right, don't understand, and things very few people can relate to. I knew on first sight my wife and I were going to be married. There was no getting around it. I knew it. She knew it. So I understand that. And when you see it done in Hollywood so much, it's like, you guys don't get it. It's not something that you can show. It's just something you know inside. And he actually wrote it correctly, which I liked.
Well, you brought up an interesting point, Lady B, the fact that you recognize that he was such a good person. And that's another important part of his characters because people believe that witchers aren't capable of emotions. Like the general public just believes the trial of the grasses eradicates emotions. And that's not true for Geralt. And so he struggles with that constantly as being a person who just feels more than the average person to be believed to be a monster that isn't capable of any of these emotions that he's actually experiencing. So he's, the classic man suppressing his feelings, trying to put up this veneer of I don't have emotions because it's the only way that he could survive through all of this. And it's an interesting way of going about it that it just really makes him such a more deep character. That's why I love Geralt so much.
He is emotional, and everybody's missing that. He is emotional. He just doesn't
I
show it. And
know.
how
I
many of
felt
us
like,
don't do it?
yeah, it's the stoicism thing we were talking about in Wheel of Time, because stoicism is such a big theme in that series, and it's like, I'm not even gonna get going on that because it's too early in the morning for a freaking rant about the Wheel of Prime. But yeah, it's the male stoicism, or this, or I think I can seriously like in this world like a woman having it too, where it's like your job because of this neutrality thing and what you have to do, and like just the fact that you're dealing with monsters of human and monster variety, that you have to keep like a kind of level head and the kind of neutrality thing, that the stoicism would be inherent in the job, and it's not popular with modern audiences.
Not at all. And that's kind of what makes it timeless. And it's something that we discuss a lot, especially with the Star Wars argument is where it comes up most these days, is the difference between relevancy and timelessness. Modern Hollywood is constantly trying to be relevant and not endeavoring to be timeless. And
Fuck
Yeah,
Disney, Star Wars.
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
that's not real.
It creates the what I call the Dory effect amongst audience members. They're going to just forget about it as soon as they leave the theater, and it's just gone. And that's what we've seen with a lot of these modern products. is there's just so relevant that it's forgettable as soon as you watch it. But when something's timeless, you can always go back to it. Like these stuff that is talked about, these heavy concepts, these heavy themes in The Last Wish, they're not respective to modern sensibilities. They're
No.
something that someone's always going to endure. Is how do you trust this person? Oh, I've done a terrible thing. How do I react to doing this terrible thing? Do I own it? And there's just so many great examples of how different people react. And so this is how art should be, is timeless without being preachy. It's not telling you what to do. Like in the Nibelun story, it's not telling you that he's a good person or that you should hate him. It's just saying, hey, this is who he is. This is what Geralt thinks about him. Do you think the right decisions were made? And I think that's the best way to get across themes, is asking the question. The best stories incorporate their themes as questions, not as statements. And we often say preachy to cover that, but I think it's just more questions over statements in thematic material. And
Oh, I
anybody,
know. I'm like, this is like random off-topic thing on that, but it's like I found this book. It was like a collection of cartoons, and it was called The Holy Ghost, and it was basically like a cartoonist using that same example of asking questions to do like a comic strip about like theology and God. And I've read it, and I just found it so interesting, even though I'm not like really Christian. But it was so interesting in the way that they like couched everything, because it would ask you questions that made you think. And I was just like, wow, when they don't tell you, they're not preaching at you. It's just like, here's a question. How would you answer this yourself? And it was kind of like, I came away with that actually like more certain of my own faith than what they think they were trying to get at, which was kind of ironic, but that's the whole thing. It's like, when you ask a question, you're going to pose it to the readers, and they're going to put in their own like life experiences and their own interpretation of it on it, so they can come up with a deeply personal meaning, which is the difference between timelessness and relevancy, like you said.
yeah, art isn't meant to educate; it's meant to expand the mind.
There was so
And
much of this that reminded me of Beowulf.
Oh yeah.
So much of it.
you could
And
definitely
that's
see Beowulf in a few of these.
and what you were just saying, Jed, that's this whole story of Beowulf and the premise behind it. And when I was reading this, I kept going, I've heard this, I've read this somewhere, I've read this somewhere. Beowulf.
Dude, and Beowulf is it the old? It's pretty close to the oldest. Gilgamesh is older, but Beowulf is pretty high up there as one of the oldest stories.
It may be the oldest. They are still finding further and further back literature
Okay.
for it. Yes.
I know Gilgamesh is in the running for that, but
Yes.
it's one of the oldest stories ever, and it's still timeless as all hell. We're never going to move past a point where Beowulf is relevant using modern terms, and that's why the Witcher series, because the other books do this just as much as Last Wish does, is so compelling, because it captures those age-old debates like the trolley problem in the Lesser Evil, and just poses the question. Because in the Lesser Evil, Geralt doesn't even know if he made the right decisions, and nobody involved. Like we didn't talk about it, but that's where his famous nickname comes from. He's called the Butcher of Blaviken wherever he goes, because how people reacted to doing that. No one in the town, no one in Blaviken knew that Renfri and her bandits were going to just start slaughtering them. They just saw this white-haired dude come in and kill a bunch of people. And so from their
That's kind
perspective,
of like
he was a monster.
the other great literary example of that is like the Jaime Lannister story, which I think like George R. R. Martin did really well, where it's like, you know what, I killed somebody who was a freaking despot and like a rapist and everything like that, but you all call me King Clare. And it's interesting, because I don't know if he read this, who knows, he probably did, but it's a different interpretation of that. And yeah,
no, these would have been written before Game of Thrones.
Yeah, like kind of like I don't know when it was published or when you would have read it, because I know that stuff was like started in the early 90s too. So
when did Game of Thrones come out? The book.
I do not remember. I think it was
22 years. Oh, sorry. 96.
96.
Yeah.
So that was 3 years after Last Wish. But
probably
it's funny. Andrzej Sapkowski, he put out 7 books in 6 years.
Hey,
Is he still writing?
He wrote a prequel in 2013, Season of Storms. It's good. It slots between Last Wish and Sword of Destiny, but it's not all that relevant. I really enjoy it, but you can definitely tell he's a much older man 20 years later coming back to it.
I know, it's like reading New Spring, if you've ever read, like,
Mm.
Wheel of Time, and that's, like, the prequel. That was, like, short stories, too. That's interesting.
Yeah. Season of Storm is really good. Once you guys finish the main series, I recommend still checking out Season of Storm. It's definitely still worth listening to or reading. But yeah, that's it. The main series has been done since 99. The last
That's
book came
awesome.
out right before I was born. And yeah, the later ones, it just gets better and better. Like, as much as I love The Last Witch, Baptism of Fire and Lady of the Lake are my two favorites out of all of them. And that's the third one
And
and the fifth one in the main series.
they're actual novels, not short stories.
Yes, yeah. So, yeah, Baptism of Fire is the third novel, so the fifth book. That one is just phenomenal. And then Lady of the Lake is the last one, so technically the seventh one. And it does some really weird stuff. Like, he starts doing new narrative devices now that he doesn't need voice of reason. Like, he starts telling things from an archaeologist's perspective. It's like, oh, this archaeologist is digging up a tomb and it finds this note that describes what happens at this point in the story. And he doesn't need to do that, but it's a really cool detail. It's a really cool detail.
That is
And
interesting. I look forward to reading those.
but I think we can start winding things down. I think, yeah, you guys have a lot of great story ahead of you guys. I'm really glad that you guys enjoyed it to this degree. And Last Wish is phenomenal, but it's mid-tier Witcher book. It's mid-tier, maybe even low tier. Like,
But it was so good still.
I know,
Is this like is this the like lowering of the bar, like adjustment of the grading curve?
No,
So it makes it gonna be that much better.
Yeah, it's low tier in comparison to itself. When compared
Okay,
to
good.
regular
Good,
stuff,
good, because
it's
I was like, no, that's good. Like this was a good story.
no, it's incredible. But when you compare it to Baptism of Fire, it doesn't hold a candle to it. Sword of Destiny is probably my least favorite, but that's not saying anything. It's like, oh yeah, I've got lots of gold. I got to choose which one's not the shiniest.
Oh yeah.
It's very difficult to tell. But Sword of Destiny, I love that you're reading that one, Lady B. The development that Ciri goes through is great right off the bat. It'll make so much more sense to you in Sword of Destiny.
I got two hats. Which one's the shiniest?
Wear them both.
Exactly. But do you guys have any final thoughts that you want to include on this? Oh, I do want, if you have that bookmarked, Lady B, the troll line that you sent me on Discord.
Oh yeah, I do actually have it.
I
That's
love
funny. You
that
want me
line.
to read it?
If you would, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you a couple of examples, said Gerald after a moment's silence. All from 2 months this side of the Buena. One day I ride up, and what do I see? A bridge, and under the bridge sits a troll and demands every passerby pays him. Those who refuse have a leg injured, sometimes both. So I go to the alderman. How much will you give me for that troll? He's amazed. What are you talking about? He asks. Who will repair the bridge if the troll's not there? He repairs it regularly with the sweat of his brow. Solid work, first rate. It's cheaper to pay his toll. So I ride on, and what do I see? A forked tail, not very big, about 4 yards, nose to tail tip. It's flying, carrying a sheep in its talons. I go to the village. How much, I ask, will you pay for me for the forked tail? The peasants fall on their knees. No, they shout, it's our baron's youngest daughter's favorite dragon. If a scale falls from its back, the baron will burn our hamlet and skin us. I ride on, and I'm getting hungrier and hungrier. I ask around for work. Certainly it's there, but what work? To catch a Rasalka for one man, a nip for another, a dryad for a third. They've gone completely mad. The villages are teeming with girls, but they want humanoids. Another task asks me to kill a mechaopteran and bring up a bone from its hand because crushed and poured into soup it cures impotence. That's rubbish, Dandelion interrupted. That's great. I love it.
Mhm.
Because it's like the greatest like metaphor for like the government ever and taxes. Like it just goes back to the whole thing where people are like, without taxes and the government, who would pay for the road?
A
But,
troll
like,
would.
like the troll, yeah, the troll's like the government guy is like.
It's a neat
like
bit of
That's why I
world building.
appreciate The Economist writing a
Mhm.
story like that. Yeah.
like the fact that the trolls aren't evil like they've always been portrayed. He's just
Mm-mm.
doing his job.
No, trolls get a lot of development. They're not intelligent, like they're not smart guys, but the trolls, like unless they attack someone, Geralt is not going to go after a troll. The trolls aren't that dangerous. And I love that there's a varying degree in types of monsters in intelligence and evilness, just like any other person. And yeah, like even within an own class, like there are harpies. You don't want to mess with those. They're bitches, kill them on sight. But a Seleno harpy is intelligent and a dream catcher and has no intentions of hurting anyone. It just wants to collect people's dreams and crystals and view them from time to time. Nothing dangerous about that. And so even
That's
within
kind of
harpies,
interesting because I don't know what that is, but it sounds like the metaphor of like surveillance. Like, I just think it's interesting because you came from Poland, like that would have probably had communism or stuff over there, but it's interesting to see those kind of like political themes in a book, and I thought that was interesting.
yeah,
Just
Oh,
and
usually
it's
don't
during
see
his
in
doing
fantasy.
yeah. Well,
during his
it's an
time. Go ahead.
yeah during just real fast. Yeah, no, I forgot what I was gonna say.
And then the other
Oh
thing in
no.
that part was that it's interesting is the running theme in the stories is that like there's a use for monsters. It's like
Mm-hmm.
that one the first thing that I read, it was like saying, well, you know what? Sometimes men invent monsters because they need to have monsters to feel
Mm-hmm.
better about themselves. And this one's like, well, sometimes we have to have monsters to like justify the existence of our government structure and taxation structure. And that's
No,
really
and
good.
I remember Mustang. This is how you do politics right. The show,
Yeah.
the book, the characters. It's not preaching you, it's telling you what is right or wrong. It's just telling you what it is.
Well, at
It's
his
not
age
saying.
and his doing of the books, he was under communist Russia. We're not talking the little communists. We're talking CCCP.
Big Daddy,
Yeah, we're
Big Daddy
talking they were
communist.
in your face. So him writing this stuff back then, could you imagine if he'd have been caught with it?
I don't know how he would have done it because yeah, writing it in the '80s, that would have been the waning Cold War, but still height of the Cold War to a degree. And I don't know how he published it because I think it was published in Poland too. It's not like he sent it abroad to get published. So,
Yeah,
Uh,
maybe it just
and it was
depended
just
on what
newspaper.
story.
what year was it published?
The
The
book
fir-
was '93, but the short
Okay,
stories came out for years before that.
so 89. Oh boy, right as the Berlin Wall was falling, even. So I could see Poland allowing it. It would have been out of main communist Russians' hands, but it would have still been under that type of leadership in Poland because I don't think Lech Walesa and the Pope had really gotten involved in their politics until more in the mid 90s, if my history remembers right. So I could see it being released, but he had to have been writing something before then when it was still under Russia. I mean, the man was possibly putting his life in danger to write something like this because they would have considered it subversion. That's just wow.
Yeah,
A
no,
lot of
it's a
respect.
miracle. It's a miracle. All right, I tried to look up the release dates, and all they're gonna give me is the publication of the collections. They're not giving me when the actual short stories came out individually. Uh, Apparently there was an original collection that came out before The Last Wish that was in 1990, but that was still a collection of them. I don't know, so it was at least pre 1990. I'm not sure,
Okay.
but yeah, it was written in the 80s regardless. So
It's a beautiful thing.
Wow. He had some passion to do that.
definitely had some passion. Well,
Uh,
I think we're coming to the close here. Any final thoughts from both of you, Lady B? Is there any overarching things you want to add besides that quote?
No, I just said just thank you so much for having us and having this discussion. It was really nice, and maybe I'll have both of you guys back on my channel when I finish reading the second and the third books, and we could talk about it maybe some more.
Oh, yeah, I'm willing to go each one by one. I love
yeah,
these.
same
One
here.
by one,
This is
let's
great.
go.
I can always talk Witcher. All right, what about you, Mustang? Any final passing thoughts on any of these short stories or the overall that we missed?
No, I think we really dove deep into it.
You mentioned you had
Since
lots of questions. Did we get all of those answered?
no, I'm gonna do a reread.
Okay.
I know I'll answer them in the reread because just going over it and yeah, there's stuff that I was like, okay, that tied into that. And I'm just trying to put all the pieces together. And like you know, I've had a very hectic few weeks, so
Yes, yes, you
a
have.
second reading will be in order, and then after that, I will probably do a third reading just for pure enjoyment. So
Perfect. All right. Well, you all know what I think about these. I think they're great. So let's go around the horn one final time and plug what you're going to be up to in the next week or two. Lady B, what you got coming up?
I have an interview tomorrow with Ryan Roger SA. I like that guy. He's so cool. I'm really excited about that. So I don't know when he'll post that, but I'm looking forward to that. And then I'm probably going to start live streaming next month. I'm getting that set up right now with Zach. So thank you, Zach, for your help. And I'm really excited to do that. So next year.
Perfect. All right. And I know you're revamping your channels, your many
mhm.
channels, Mustang. Anything you want
I
to plug?
well, I'm going to keep Tranquil Waters pretty much as it is with my little children behind me. Mustang will be dedicated to reviews of movies and whatever else pops into my head. And then for the rest of the next 2 weeks, I'm going to try and be surviving a blizzard that's coming in and seeing what else I get to do. Harassing you and Adam,
Of
you know,
course. Of course.
but just having a good, wonderful Christmas, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I hope everyone has a great Christmas.
Well, for me, even though it's a holiday week, it's going to be a very busy week for me. Tomorrow comes out the third part of my Witcher lore series covering the death of Laura Dern, which is going to be a very important piece of the history puzzle. Definitely check that out if you're interested. If you like this, want to see what the backstory to all this was, check out my lore and history series. Then daily videos, as always, Geeks and Gamers Tabletop on Thursday, playing some Starfinder with them on Thursday nights. And I'm going to be playing a lot of Witcher 3 over the intervening few days just because I love that game and I'm going to play as much as I can. And then the dreaded day comes on Sunday when Witcher Blood Origin comes out.
Mhm.
And if I'm putting together a panel for that, Lady B, if you want to watch that
I'm
and
on it.
if you want to do that,
Sure, why not?
well, we're thinking about doing it the Monday after Christmas
Mhm.
someday
Okay.
during the day. Does
Yeah.
that work? We can talk about it behind the scenes. But yeah, Blood Origin is coming, so I'll have a review up for that. Christmas Day, I'll be putting out a video on the Doctor Who Christmas specials and just a little thing about that. And that's all that we have for this evening. Thank you guys for joining us. We had a impressive chat interacting with us. It was great to hear you guys. Mike was here, Zax, JB, Legatus. Thank you all for being here. Salty Traveling Sea, and so many others that I may have missed. But that's where we're going to have to leave you guys for this evening, unfortunately. So, in the meantime, everyone have a Merry Christmas and a
Merry
Happy New
Christmas.
Year.
Hey, yo, are you feeling what I'm doing up in here? Oh, I know you are. Do you miss all the good, compelling stories that we used to get back in Hollywood that they ain't putting down no more? I know you missing it. So check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern day mental illness issues, baby. Book 1, Down in Flames. Book 2, Apocalypse Then. These are currently on sale. What are you waiting for? Get your hands on them. And we got Book 3, Kill the Dark, is coming down the pipeline. Just wait for all the good stuff that's dropping. You ain't gonna be disappointed, fam.